if I were to characterize my preaching, it would be, well, like me, I'm vegetarian. It would be a kind of ovo-lacto vegetarian, complementary protein, high fiber kind of preaching. Good for you, but not particularly exciting, but part of a good spiritual breakfast. Now, I'll take my tongue out of my cheek long enough to say that I really am generally uneasy with red meat sermons and oratory. We've heard a lot from our politicians recently, and we know that they are designed not to speak the truth, but sometimes to evade it, and that they can create a momentary unity around issues and anger rather than unity around principles and relationships. So while it's a lot more fun to flog an issue and to whip up the froth of outrage, unless you're really anchoring that on a principle, something on which you can stand, it will be little more than flogging yourself with a wet noodle. It'll look like you're doing something, but it won't amount to much. So I'm asking myself, I'm asking you, what is that rock we stand on? The bedrock that lies beneath even our commitment to justice, equity, and compassion. Hey, wait a minute, you just thought, aren't those our principles, justice, equity, and compassion, and human relations? Yes, but what do they stand on? What's underneath of that? Prophetic preaching, which means that which names truth to power, should come from what ought to be more than what ought not to be. A prior vision, a prior dream, a prior hope must be there. Like that famous dream of Dr. King, because if you are critical and protesting without a further vision to call you on, you become cynical. Everything's crappy, it's never going to get better. Back in that Bible that Mary loves so much, Book of Proverbs, without a vision, the people perish. That brings me to what you just heard and what I did this week. I'm an opera fan. I don't claim that to be your thing, but it is mine. And I was listening to the Met as much as I could this week. I also post a daily dose of Beethoven because it's his 250th anniversary and he needs a little bit of a shout out. Why do I do this? Well, because I was a music major in college, because I still love it. But it does for me what that piece of music may have done for you. It embodies a vision of what could be and is not yet. Not just the beauty of the music, which is beautiful. It's what it takes to make it. Can you imagine what it took to make that video you just saw? All those people singing, but not at the same time, right? They can't be done at the same time. If you've ever tried to sing live on Zoom, it's awful. It requires planning. It requires cooperation. It requires not wanting to be the star. It requires being part of a larger endeavor to which you in some ways submit, but because the endeavor is where you want to go, you're willing to collaborate and cooperate. That's the world I believe in. That we are all given a voice, whether it's when we hear and speak or when we do with our hands or with our feet. We have all been given a voice to be in, I think George Eliot called the choir invisible. We are all a voice in the great symphony of humanity. And we feel best when we can contribute that voice in a way that harmonizes, connects, and amplifies the voices around us. That sense of completeness, of wholeness, is what music gives me. And I bet you it gives it to you too. I think that's where we get our dream, that experience. And as I thought about how that feeling is so important to me, I thought of a long forgotten quotation that came back to me. Some of you will remember it, others I'll have to give you some background. Some see things as they are and ask why. I dream things that never were and ask why not. It was Robert F. Kennedy who probably should have been president. Do you have a dream like that? Of things that never were, and ask why not? That's where democracy comes from. That's where voting goes, as you heard from the Time for All Ages. That is what has been lost in our political and social life in the last 20, 30, 40 years, as we have watched parties and candidates and politicians pull things one way or the other for their particular version of reality. But I maintain that this experience we've all had, whether it's singing or listening or in some other capacity, that this experience is the universal one. Yes, it's in the Bible. You can also find it in the Quran. You can find it in the sutras. You can find it in science. With that vision, I can now turn to reality and measure the distance between them and then ask, why are we not there? That is the prophetic imperative. And that's why you need to hear about Uncle Ben. Not the guy who makes the rice, but the guardian of Peter Parker, alias Spider-Man. Now, Uncle Ben does not know of Peter's great powers. They're still a secret. But he teaches Peter a lesson that most of our leaders still need to learn. Blake, can you show us?
These are the years when a man changes into the man he's going to become the rest of his life. Just be careful who you change into. This guy, Flash Thompson, he probably deserved what happened. But just because you can beat him up doesn't give you the right to. Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Don't you wish some other people had heard that and were sitting in the car at the same time? I do. If one thing has made me a relentless critic of our president, it's not his policies, although they deserve scrutiny. It is his refusal to see that his power has a commensurate responsibility. He claims, for example, to be a Christian. But the Gospel of Luke in chapter 12, there's that Bible stuff again. What are you doing, Fred? There in the Gospel of Luke, it says, to whom much is given, much will be required. I saw a few faces going along with me there. You remember that verse. Is that not the same idea? Rabbi Hillel, who lived at the same time as the Jesus community was being formed, said, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? Shortly after telling Peter about great responsibility, Uncle Ben is killed by a criminal who was loose because Peter didn't want to use his powers when he could. And this irony haunts Peter Parker as he seeks to use his power responsibly in a world that generally refuses to do the same. There's a story like this in the Bible. So here comes the other Jesus part, Jesus versus Spider-Man. It's not really verses in the end. In the Gospels, there's the parable of the talents, which doesn't mean skills like America's Got Talent. It means a hunk of money. And a harsh master in the parable hands money to his servants, 1, 2, and 3, says, go and use it while I'm gone. Tell me how you did when I get back. And when he comes back, one had made double the money, one had made a little more, and the other had buried the money because he knew that the master would punish him if he lost it. And the master looks at the servant and says, you're the bad one. You may have saved my money, but you didn't take any risk. I gave you power and you refused to use it. It is the famous sin of omission. All these stories, and I could muster another dozen, portray the dilemma of power, the dilemma that is present when we walk into a polling place. When we elect people, we are giving them power and we expect them to use it. When we speak of leadership, we mean someone who is willing to act. After all, power literally means the ability to do things. But do they have that power and the power of love? Back to Dr. King. And I think that's where we are heartbroken, where we are empty, where we are cynical, because we see people who do not comprehend the power of love and understand only the love of power. And I make that criticism much wider than the current administration. Our political system, with its free market competitive nature, seems to attract not just the solid citizen trying to serve, but plenty of people with their own agendas, both personal and political. Power almost always seeks to keep power, of course, and as they keep it, they do it by forming alliances with other powers, other politicians, people with money. The voters to whom they ostensibly work are way down the list of creditors to be paid. A 2014 study by two professors at Princeton and Northwestern concluded, this is 6 years ago now, that, quote, the economic elites and organized groups representing business interests have substantial independent impacts on U.S. government influence. Moreover, because U.S. government policy, while average citizens and mass-based interest groups have little or no independent influence. Moreover, because of the strong status quo bias built into our system, even when fairly large majorities favor policy change, they generally do not get it. We believe that if policymaking is dominated by powerful business organizations and a small number of affluent Americans, then America's claim to being a democratic society is seriously threatened. That was in 2014. I don't see that we've improved since then. So when Uncle Ben warns that great power demands great responsibility, I am seeing a colossal class of people who don't know that or choose to ignore it. They have come to the understanding quite clearly that money equals power and power equals money, and that if you have the one, you're entitled to the other. If power is the ability to get things done, money is the source of power because it can amplify your voice. It can extend your influence large beyond your own personal powers. Any one of you, none of you could stand out in front of a television camera and make a commercial for a candidate. But one person with $1 million can make dozens of commercials. So your voice in a democracy becomes minuscule and the voice of money becomes immense. That is why we're losing trust in our democratic society. We know it's a rigged game. And isn't it ironic that the one who's calling it rigged is the one doing the rigging? But I'll leave that to my personal opinion. Thank you very much. That is not an official opinion of VUU, but it is my official opinion. But he's not alone. It's been going on for decades, and he's not unique. Power concentrated in a few hands has always corrupted democracy, always has and always will. It is literally great power that is irresponsible. To hold politicians responsible, though, without holding the money responsible is useless. And therein, I believe, lies the problem in our political culture, because invisible, unaccountable power is denying those very self-evident truths that we say is the reason we are a nation. Either unaccountable power goes, or the very idea of America is gone. Now, I wrote down here several things I think we ought to do, but I'm looking at the time. I'll save that for another moment. I want you to know, Rosa Parks died 15 years ago this past week. There's a monument to her in downtown Grand Rapids, and I love it because she and I have the same birthday, February 4th. And in fact, she was 40 years older than I am exactly. She is famous, though, for something that happened back in 1955. It was just about the 1st of December, in fact, when She got on a bus, as you know, and when asked to move, didn't. Now, this was no casual choice. She had been trained for that moment. The people around her were ready to respond. It was no random act of civil disobedience. She knew that day that the next time came, she was going to resist. And yet, because one person acted on that day and was ready to act on that day, she and a few other people changed the city of Montgomery in the United States of America. Because she used love and power together. Her love of truth, her love of justice, her love of her own self, her love of her community, and enacted that love against those who did not love her back. Exactly how that got organized is beyond this sermon. It was a little more complicated than the books make it sound. But I believe her act truly embodied love and power together. And it created more change than the federal government had accomplished in 100 years since emancipation. When we find a way to live into our deepest principles, to love into our deepest principles, we may feel powerless, but we actually are becoming immensely powerful. Because it's when we rise to the responsibility of power that the power becomes ours. The real election is never a choice between parties or candidates, but between principles and principalities, to use another biblical reference. This nation needs to reclaim and said that's worth trying. And from time to time we have tried. We really have. We've always failed, but we've always fallen at least forward. If we went face down in the mud, at least we were a step further than when we didn't fall. And we got up and tried again. It's never been easy. It's never been long. It is always hard. It is always resisted. But we've always gotten up. We need to reclaim that vision, knowing that that is in our DNA, that when Dr. King spoke in Washington, D.C. back in 1963, he quoted that very document as the basis for his dream. That when we hear the preamble, there's my Constitution pen right there, that it talks about we the people, not we the power. That when we still get choked up to the Gettysburg Address or the story of, or Emma Lazarus's poem about the Statue of Liberty, or when Langston Hughes recites poetry about that says, let America be America again, when we hear Pete Seeger's song like we just heard that choir sing, we get choked up because we know that's true, or it could be true, and it should be true, and that we still want to believe in it. It is all around us, this vision. And what the principles and principalities and powers want is for us to stop believing in that, to give up, to say, no, it's dog eat dog and mighty crush the weak. That's all it is. Losing faith in that vision is the true danger that besets us now. We shall be called to account. Of that, there is no doubt. We shall be called to account by our children and our children's children if we do not open our eyes and incline our ears to those better angels of our nature when we can. Forgive my scratching the nose. Whenever we choose power over principle, tactics over hopes, precedents over promises, we literally bury the wealth of principle. And when we do that, we allow the principle of wealth to run amok. It's time to dig up what we have buried. It's time to risk it. It's time to live it. Think of the world you want to exist. Listen for it. You've heard it. Ask why not. Love that world so much that you're willing to outlive this one to get there. Then act as though it could happen. The word elect means to choose. Choose that world. Because when we vote, we are genuinely choosing the world we want to exist for everyone, not just ourselves, for everyone. We have the power if we're willing to risk it. If we're willing to choose to use our power for something larger than ourselves. But of this you can be sure, if we choose not to risk ourselves, someone else will risk us for us. It's that simple. Live as though it matters, or let someone else decide if you live. It's really that simple, and it's that hard. I trust you've all voted already, and if you haven't, get there. I trust that no matter how the election turns out, the vision of the America and the world we believe in will remain with us. Because whatever happens, the flame in our chalice depends on us to keep it burning. Thank you for your time and attention today, my dear friends, as I come to know you. And by next week, we'll be in a different world, and we'll figure out what to do from there on. At this point, I'd like to give it back to Mary, who will introduce our final hymn. Am I correct, Mary?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Wooden, for that really inspiring sermon. And now, realizing that next week is going to be significant, however it goes, let us sing our closing hymn with Katie, One More Step.
One more step, we will take one more step, till there is peace for us, and everyone will take one more step. One more word, we will say one more word, till every word is heard by everyone. We'll say one more word. One more prayer, we will say one more prayer, till every prayer is shared by everyone. We'll say one more prayer. One more song, we will sing one more song, till every song is sung by everyone. We'll sing one more song.
Please join me in saying our words to extinguish our chalices. Though we extinguish the chalice, our connection to each other and this community remains. May its light guide us this week as we walk the path of justice, speak words of love, and fill our world with compassion until we meet again.
And yes, this day and every day is a day which was made for us, for all creation. And if we do not rejoice and find gladness in it, it will not be there. So harvest the joy and the gladness. Choose joy. Choose gladness even in the most dank and dreary corners of life, because it is our light of hope that shows the way for those to come. Amen. And now you're going to be directed into breakout rooms if you wish to be chatting with one another. The question is, when were you strong even when you did not feel strong, as I remember? And as you go, you can visit with your friends. If you're new and you want to visit with me and ask questions or just get acquainted, do not go into a breakout room. And maybe we can watch a few of those Halloween slides as we do that. Blake?